you can get creative and you might be able to come up with things that work from a business perspective. But at the end, we would still find that they're unethical. It sounds simple, but at the end of the day, it's a philosophy that you have to remind yourself every day, and you have to make sure that every decision you're making is consistent with that philosophy.
When digital transformation can either make or break your company's future, how do you ensure that you're on the right side of innovation? Welcome to Care to Lead podcast. I'm your host, Cynthia Corsetti, and today we're exploring the critical role of digital transformation in the modern business world with Fred Tavan, a leader who has successfully driven these changes in one of the most traditional industries, insurance. As the Senior Vice President and Chief Pricing Officer at Legal & General America, Fred has been in the forefront of integrating data science and innovation at the digital transformation to revolutionize how his company operates and competes. And I, first of all, welcome Fred, and thank you for being here. You are in an industry that is so specialized and so interesting. I love talking to actuaries. So tell me more how you got into this, and welcome.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, no, I got into actuarial science. I actually started out my career as an engineer, electrical and computer engineer. And after I finished that program, I had a lot of friends that were in the actuarial science program. I was looking at something that was a bit more connected to business. And instead of doing an MBA, I decided to kind of go down the actuarial science track. There's a lot of overlap in the mathematics between actuarial science and electrical engineering. So I thought it would be a great idea to build a hybrid career rather than just a single track career. So that's why I got into it. I've reinvented myself several times since then. Starting out just as a junior actuary, designing a brand new valuation system, moving on into corporate tax, then into mergers and acquisitions on the consulting side, then becoming a leader in enterprise risk management, then getting into the reinsurance world. And eventually, the last few years, I've really been spending a lot of time on the innovation side as a global leader of the innovation lab at Sun Life Financial for a few years. Then where I was spending a lot of time in Silicon Valley and so on. So I got to meet a lot of the startups. I got to understand that culture, and I got to understand how they got things off the ground and how they got good at using agile methodologies, and just be able to kind of take innovative ideas and put them into practice and so on. So I've been focused on that now since around 2016-ish. And it's been a great ride since then. I've had a lot of fun and learned a lot about data science as well, machine learning, as well as innovation itself.
Tell me a little bit more about Legal & General America. Yeah,
Legal & General America had been around a long time. They're the U.S. subsidiary is part of a parent company, Legal & General, whose parent is in the U.K., headquartered in London. The parent company is has a wide portfolio of different products, from annuities to group products for employers to protection products in the retail side that include life insurance and individual annuities, so on and so forth. There's also a global asset management business, and there's a pension risk transfer business as well that's institutional. So very broad businesses at the parent company. In the U.S., though, we tend to focus primarily on, in my area, the individual life, and specifically term insurance, where we're one of the leaders in the U.S. industry. And another subsidiary also in the U.S. focuses on the institutional pension risk transfer in the U.S.
So you're going to be able to put something to rest for me. It's kind of like, it's a thing I heard years and years ago. You can tell me if this is true, that actuaries from life insurance specifically want people who they consider you a good risk if you are physically fit enough to run a marathon and smart enough not to do it.
Yeah, I mean, those are people we would tend to put in our highest, best rating classes. We call them preferred plus usually. So that is correct. And no, it's not that we don't want to cover other individuals. It's just different rating classes. And yeah, this is one of the areas, quite frankly, where we're pretty good at, is being able to classify not only healthy people and identify them out of the general population, but also be able to recognize when someone is impaired and we can still offer them a product at a reasonable price.
So how is AI disrupting what you do?
Yeah, so disruption is all what I'm all about. It's since 2016, as I mentioned earlier. And so AI obviously is a broad word. I think that most of what exists realistically right now is not what you see in the Hollywood movies. It's called narrow AI, and it includes things like generative AI that have come out lately. But more than that, there's also machine learning, which is really what we end up using. And machine learning has started to disrupt the industry by allowing us to uncover more insights that allow us to automate more of the business. And what I mean by that is, human beings and the brain kind of is limited to 3 dimensions. And while we can recognize patterns, as long as it's up to 3 dimensions, we're not so good as, if it becomes 6, 7, 8 type dimensions. And so we need machines to help us recognize those multidimensional patterns. And machine learning has helped us to kind of identify those patterns and then take those patterns and use them in automation to improve the client experience and to make our underwriters more productive, so on and so forth.
The insurance industry is often seen as traditional and slower to change. How have you been able to foster a culture of innovation, and what strategies have you found most effective encouraging your team to embrace digital tools?
It all comes down to how you build the team, and you find the people with the right mindset that are willing to tackle change, right? So not everybody is comfortable with change, and you need to make sure that you start off with the right team and the right skill set. In order to do what we're doing, we need a multidisciplinary kind of team to be able to do everything that we're doing. So that includes a team of underwriters, of actuaries, of data scientists, MBAs. We do project management, product design. So I would say that's number one. Number two is, understanding all of the data that's your organization is collecting, and making sure that you can get your hand on it so that you can start to analyze data and really start changing the culture from, usually the older life insurance companies, there would be a lot of judgment in business decisions. So the culture that I like to kind of lead now is more data-driven decision making. It's worked quite well in other industries. It's not a brand new concept. There's books written about it, so on. So that's the two big things that, are really driving what we're doing in terms of leading change. So obviously, as part of that culture as well, you also need people who are willing to kind of take some risks, right? Because when you start to innovate, it's not guaranteed that you will always have something successful at the end. But again, if you kind of use an agile approach and, you take the right steps with a minimum viable product designs, and you can kind of test and learn quickly. So again, those are concepts that didn't really exist in traditional life insurance company. We need to bring in kind of scrum masters into the fold to manage how we do agile, so on and so forth. Like when you're dealing with a team of underwriters and actuaries and data scientists, they're not used at all to the agile approach like you would see, for example, in the IT world at Google or Facebook and so on. So it's something that we have to teach our staff. So it takes leadership to kind of recognize those things and make sure that you have the right training in place and the right people in place. And you give it some time and some patience for all of that to get absorbed so that it gets kind of all comes together and glued together and gets traction.
So you mentioned a culture of risk-taking, and a lot of leaders struggle with that, right? They'll say, yeah, we want you to take risks, we want you to make mistakes, and we learn from mistakes. But when then people do make mistakes, they get in trouble, or the leader doesn't really live up to that. So as a leader, what advice do you have for other leaders who really do want to embrace a risk-taking culture for their organization?
Yeah, I would say number one is really trust your boss and the people above you, because you got to make sure that everything is starting at the top. Now, what you're describing is absolutely correct. That you see that all over. I've worked at many companies, and that is exactly what happens. And so I think it comes down to that some of it is just making sure that your boss is going to be comfortable with some potential failures. But this is again where I think the agile can come in quite handy, right? Because moving away from the kind of waterfall approach, like traditionally these projects would start off and a lot of money would be spent, a lot of time would go by, and then all of a sudden you get to the end and the result is not quite what everybody expected. So it's considered a failure, but it's a failure after a lot of resources and a lot of money has been spent. But with agile, you're able to kind of contain that. And if you do it well, right, because not everybody can do it well. Like a lot of people will just talk about agile, but not really know how to implement it well. I think that's where you can kind of get that comfort with the higher levels, because they know that you're going to deliver something. And that speed of delivery is I would say the secret sauce at the end of the day is, are you able to deliver something that can be put into practice and when leadership can see the value relatively quickly without having spent a lot of time and a lot of money? So we spend a lot of time internally at our company managing that velocity of delivery. It's key to the success and to that risk management taking, because if you're going to fail, like at least fail on something relatively small and not something big.
And on that same topic, our listeners, I always like them to learn something from listening. And what I've discovered in 20 years in executive leadership and 11 years of coaching executives, often our biggest learning comes from our biggest failures. So as you look back at your career, what was one of the biggest missteps that you might have made in leadership that taught you the most that our listeners can maybe gain some insight from?
One of the big mistakes was actually a success that later on I realized had consequences, because I pushed my team really hard to deliver on time and on budget. But what I realized is, I had the tendency of getting perhaps too far ahead of everybody else. And then I would kind of set tight deadlines and put a lot of pressure on everybody to kind of follow me at the right pace, so on and so forth. So what I realized is that not always the best approach. Is that, when you start down the journey, you need to make sure that everybody's kind of, you're staying close to everybody and not getting too far ahead. So I think that is a lesson that if you can apply right away without kind of ending up in that same trap from a leadership perspective, it's a good one to have.
So you've transitioned and kind of reinvented yourself, as you've said. What are some of the hardest transitions to make? I know leaders often struggle when they go from producers to leadership. So you've been in leadership a long time and you've kind of transitioned into different kind of roles. What was the most difficult transition?
The most difficult transition, I would say, is obviously when I reinvented myself. Those were transitions where I had to re-educate myself on my own and do that on the side as well, at the same time as I'm doing my job, so on and so forth. So that usually takes a concerted effort. It's not something that happens magically. Now, a lot of other leaders might bring in consultants, for example, to help them do that, so on and so forth. I like to be able to kind of coach people at a detail level and so on and so forth. So as you're saying, you move away from doing it yourself. However, I still believe that you have to be a very strong coach and you still have to be able to generate ideas with your team and so on and so forth and recognize when they're going off track and so on. So you still have to be a subject matter expert. So whenever, you're transitioning from one to the other, you got to make sure that you keep a certain amount of technical expertise, even though you're at the leadership level. And especially when you're doing innovative things, right? Because most of the time, the team below you as well is in the place where they need to learn new things and they need some handholding to go through that, right? Very few people I would say across the country, are able to kind of connect all of those together and kind of leap into innovating without some coaching, so on and so forth. So those are usually the most difficult transition is, again, not only kind of making it happen for yourself, but then, having your team under you go through the same journey and go through all those learnings and really be able to start to innovate and to really generate the energy that innovation brings along in terms of success and winning and so on and so forth. It really all builds on itself. And when the team gets a sense that, hey, this is working and is working better than before, and we're able to deliver more, it comes together really well.
As a leader, how do you identify what are some signs that you see in an employee who maybe isn't accepting innovation or changing or growing as fast as you might like to see?
As I mentioned before, we're highly data driven. So we pay close attention now. So in Agile, you have metrics that allows you to kind of measure the velocity, right, of production. So you monitor the units of work being done by individuals, so on and so forth. There's also systems that track the productivity, for example, of underwriters, so on and so forth. So what we're doing is we don't want to kind of have a culture that punishes people in terms of when they're faced with innovation and it takes some time to go through the learning curve, so on and so forth. What we're trying to have within LGA is a coaching culture where we can actually use that data, and that data allows us to kind of compare individuals and say, hey, look, you're doing the same work as these other individuals, and on average, you're performing below average, so on and so forth. And these are the areas where we're seeing that you're not performing, at least at the average level, so on and so forth. So then we can have like very concrete, detailed coaching with them to allow them to kind of catch up. Obviously, then, if we do this after a while and they're not catching up, then that's when we have to start reaching the conclusion that, well, maybe these are not the right individuals who can accept change and who can accept innovation, and they belong in other roles within the company that doesn't have that, or they have to move on.
Yeah. Having the data and having the very factual numbers that you can it's easier to have that conversation with someone when you have the data there to back it up, instead of like, well, that's your opinion. My opinion is I'm doing great. So the data is very valuable. You mentioned one of your quotes that you liked was, genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. Would you like to dive into that at all?
Yeah, no, I really believe in that. Like it does take a lot of work because, as I say, it's not just one smart individual that can make all this happen, which is that 1%. It's not just one bright idea. Like you have to know many things. It truly is the case that 99% of it is very hard work. And as we said earlier, sometimes it leads to failure, so on and so forth. So you need to have the ability to have some resilience and some thick skin and some trust in others that, we are going to get to where we want. Maybe we didn't get it on this iteration. We're going to get it on the next iteration, and so on and so forth. So most of that is really perspiration, as you go through the motions of making it happen.
So as we wrap things up, most of the people who listen to my podcast know that Care to Lead is my signature leadership system, and it's built on 4 foundational pillars, which are clarity, authenticity, responsibility, and engagement. So I always like to ask, as a final question, I like to choose one of these pillars and ask a question about it. And in your case, I'd like to focus on the pillar of responsibility. So how do you ensure that digital transformation initiatives are not only innovative, but also ethically responsible, particularly in terms of data privacy and customer trust?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think that really resides with the executive level philosophy, always keeping an eye on that. We philosophically believe that the products that we sell have to be good value to the consumer. And we pay a lot of attention to that, not only from just a price perspective, but also from the ethical perspective. So we keep an eye on making sure that we're staying within our lane in terms of what data is valid, in terms of, again, sticking to the causation medical records for life insurance, so on and so forth. And now not really stepping outside of those bounds and trying to, now you can get creative and you might be able to kind of come up with things that work from a business perspective. But at the end, we would still find that they're unethical. It sounds simple, but at the end of the day, it's a philosophy that you have to remind yourself every day, and you have to make sure that every decision you're making is consistent with that philosophy.
Excellent. And I want to ask you this question as well. If there was something that's not on your resume, not in your LinkedIn bio, and your team members might not know about you, but it's kind of a fun fact, what can you share about yourself today?
I used to love skydiving, so I don't think that's usually anywhere in any of my bios. I kind of stopped pursuing it because I was, actuarial exams are pretty intense and you have to dedicate your life to be able to pass them, so on and so forth. But no, I hope that one day, now that my kids are grown up and so on and so forth, I can get back to it again.
I'm curious what that would do to someone's life insurance.
I know.
That can't be good.
But remember that there's a higher risk of dying from an accident than dying from skydiving. So, it's all
dying from a heart
relative.
attack on your way down. Right. That would be scary.
True.
Thank you, Fred, for sharing your insights and experiences with us today. It's clear that digital transformation isn't just about technology. It's about leadership, culture, and a commitment to continuous improvement. We genuinely appreciate your time today.
My pleasure. Great to be with you.
So thank you again. And to our listeners, remember, leaders who care to lead. I'll see you next time.